We're live
We're live.
with Videogame Sommelier, now streaming edition.
And it looks like we're going to watch Lord of the
With
Rings or
audio.
something like that.
Lord of the Rings with audio this time.
With audio.
We're literally just watching a movie.
Stereo sound. Yes.
This was never something that I got to talk about, but I loved the theming of this game from the get-go. You know, so it's talking about in case of emergency, and life under emergency conditions will continue, but you should, it's just, I love that immediately it's talking to you as someone in an apocalypse situation,
Totally.
not a player.
Right.
No. Not a player at all. All right.
Wow.
So I'm going to hit continue, and supposedly this is going to bring us up right on Kate. And if not,
Great.
well, we're going to be speed running the whole game. Here we go.
Buckle up.
Buckle up.
And by
How come
speed
I can
running,
go?
we mean walking.
Walking, because there's no,
But
no running
someone
in this
Google what the shortest path is to the bunker.
It's like 15 miles.
This is what happens when we go live on the off week.
Oh.
Oh, the other thing that happens is I decided not to set up my lights, and then I also decided to wear all black. So I'm like, oh,
Brilliant.
two things I'm not going to do next time.
Wait,
Just a floating head over here, a very, very white head.
I might have taken down my pineapple somewhere over here. Remember? I had like a,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I guess somebody cleaned
Oh,
it.
yeah.
Here we go.
Look at that. We've arrived, gentlemen.
So the game started just on the other side of those gates.
Yeah.
And I was kind of fearing the entire game as we walked further and further away from this. I'm like, do I have to walk all the way back? But you don't. It just it teleports you.
Very slowly. So already, so we're playing the epilogue or the third act, right? Kate's story, the last one, and we're already shown the visuals that we were seeing when we completed each of the other stories. And here now, instead of seeing this at the completion of Kate's story, we're seeing it at the beginning. And the word slow is printed on the ground.
Oh, I thought it said Mott's. I didn't know that was slow.
There are six observatories here. There's the first, and then there are others on the hillside that we'll be getting to, and they're all numbered. And at each observatory, there's a bit of dialogue from Kate. So we're going to listen to that dialogue, and then we're going to interpret it, right?
Dialogue about the dialogue.
We're the most qualified people to do this.
We do good impressions. So we can do the voices if the audio cuts out.
Oh, rats. You know what oh, no, I probably do have the subtitles on. Okay.
Great.
If not, this is going to be real difficult. This is as fast as I can go. No. No, really it is.
So, Rye, is that graph back there, is that of a black hole?
Oh,
On the ground?
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah, that's kind of the Einsteinian, black hole sucks in all of space-time and creates this wormhole. I mean, this is all part of the lore of Einstein's, theory. It's like, well, if this goes on infinitely, maybe it comes out to another point, or it expands at another place. So perhaps a black hole can serve as a wormhole to, whatever.
So real quick, and not to get lost because we have a lot to cover, but this is the part that I had a little beef with. Who has the time and artistic ability to draw all this? Where did she get the chalk? Like, look how good these circles are. Do you know how hard it is to draw a perfect circle?
With chalk, no less.
Yeah, like these graphs. Like, look at that thing. There's no way.
And look, she's circling dead birds instead of maybe picking them up and throwing them away. Burying
But
them.
even the
Her
location of the
priorities.
birds seems to be a little bit of an iterative pattern.
Oh my gosh. extending outward, like the golden ratio. So this symbol is going to come up a lot.
Yep.
Can I zoom in? Oh, I forget if there was a zoom button.
I don't think there is. I was trying to do that too. But that symbol was making me think a lot about Outer Wilds with the black hole and white hole station.
Oh, yeah. So that diagram,
The butterfly.
it's, oh gosh, now I'm going to forget it. Some kind of fluid dynamics. There's a name that it's based off of, the guy who came up with the equations for it. But it's commonly thought of as attaching to like chaos theory, the idea that small iterations produce wild, chaotic results. And it so happens to look like a butterfly's wings, which kind of collapses the metaphor on itself. And of course, they've been using this the entire game.
Yeah, we should have seen pictures of Ian Malcolm over here. That was
Jeff Goldblum.
Right.
So let's listen to the first dialogue.
On the plane, Stephen leaned across me and pointed out the window. Down there, he said. That's home. But all I saw were patches of color. I don't think until this moment that I understood that one could contain the other so completely.
Okay. So she looks out the plane. She sees patches of color like farmlands, right? And he says it's home. And she says that the idea of these patches of color and the idea of home can contain each other so completely. Whereas the patches of color are this abstracted, this abstracted geometry upon the surface of the earth, right? And the abstracted geometry upon the surface of the earth and home and everything that means can contain each other. Okay. Where are we supposed to go with that?
Yeah. The thing this left me thinking about was, okay, if I am standing in my master bedroom and I say this is home, like totally it is, and then I like go a little bit wider and we're in our house. This is home. Absolutely. And then go wider, our property. This is home. And then you keep going. At what point does it no longer feel like home when it's to your street or your city or your country, all those things? And I was thinking about when this is at a cosmic level, that if she is trying to think about, so much more, and where is the pattern from, and what has the pattern seen, I would anticipate that not only would England feel like home, but Earth would feel like home, and maybe our solar system would feel like home. And so it was just interesting to be thinking about what size, or what feels familiar enough for me to feel like it's home. And it really, I think, depends on how big a space I'm saying isn't home. Because if we're talking about the cosmos, then absolutely our entire galaxy feels like home in that sense, because that's just a speck, in the universe. But if we're just talking about our town, then I'd say, just my house. So it was kind of a scaling of her thinking.
So I'm reminded of two things. I'm reminded of Chesterton's whole idea that the goal of a journey and going into the familiarity is to bring that back into the familiar, or to find the unfamiliar in the familiar and the familiar in the unfamiliar. It's like the collapsing of these two seemingly opposites. And I think too of this game and how we just walked through all of these farmlands and got to know the stories of all these people. And here she's so disconnected from it. So this early monologue really helps us appreciate her experience. Here, she's on the other side of this locked gate, right?
Yeah. And I mean, metaphorically, she's been kind of on the other side of this whole town her entire time she's here. She's never been a part of of the community. She's felt ostracized and set apart, and so I kind of feel like this is sort of a subtle little way to keep her distance, and little things like that kind of stand out to me.
Yeah, and it's almost the author trying to get us to say, okay, I know you think Kate's like removed from everything we've just witnessed, but here I am to tell you that Kate's experience has every bit as much to do with the end of this game as everything you've experienced so far. And if you don't believe me, go listen to tape number 2, continue on pondering this as you go forward.
And one interesting thing about these tapes is they cannot be replayed. You can replay her messages on the radios, but you cannot replay them in these locations. So it continues to add, and we'll get more to the fleeting nature of this whole sequence, but it adds to that for me.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, it's they're one and done. So
yep.
Okay, so let's head over to Tower 2 and see how this narration stacks on top of the first. They're all so different or add so much more. And whereas that one had all of Jimmy's illustrious chalk drawings, these, my goodness.
Lots of mouse traps.
a lot of old 80s printers.
Just the way it looked on the screen just looked like one of those things they throw a ping pong ball and they all set off. That would have been cool too.
It's even got the little holes. They're like dot matrix printers,
I feel like I want to walk in when all of those are running. I just want to hear that from every direction.
Kate, what are you doing? Leave me alone.
Some of these are different versions of the equation. They're not all the same. And so we're seeing at least two varieties here. And yeah, how does an observatory have so many printers?
And then there are numbers. And some people online were suggesting that this was the key to solving the number station. So to the right, so can you see those little numbers on the ground, like 8, 7? So turn left.
Okay, left.
Yeah, keep rotating around left. Okay, now next to each row.
Oh, yep, there you go.
Every now and then light catches them. So
7, 6, 5. Yeah,
and so some people were hypothesizing that the placement of these printers in connection with that number was part of decoding the number system, and and I don't think it got farther than that, but that was the best reason for that I could think of, because there's no real other. I don't think there's a graph that those are associated with.
Right. Here's a little kind of side room. Oh, I guess this is where her tape is. Okay. Let's see what she has to say for herself.
I watched a butterfly dancing in a strip of sunlight. All of its life contained in a single day. The blink of an eye between the ebb of the darkening tide. Lying there with the pattern curled around me, I saw the inevitability. The necessity of presence born from absence. The constant unfolding.
Oh, man. Okay.
So just one thing that kind of is in line with what I was talking about scaling something.
Yeah.
Is just all the different time frames that she gave. A blink of an eye, a day, its entire life. And so it's just fascinating, again, like when you think of something like a value like home, how that can be scaled, but you can also scale life, that our lives, hopefully will be, like whatever, 90 years long or so, give or take. And that can feel like ages, depending on where you're coming from. But if you're thinking about the age of the Earth, that is much closer to the blink of an eye, the butterfly in a day. And so I feel like so much of what this entire sequence was about for me was continuing to like zoom back and get a broader sense of, what is the pattern? How long has it been here? How large is the universe and all of that? So that's just kind of in line with the scaling that I was talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. What's really interesting is somewhat of a side tangent, but I'll never forget. And I do this now. I've got a 3-year-old daughter, and, here we are talking about something we did a year and a half ago. And, to me, a year and a half ago it's not that long. That's just whatever I did last year, whatever, but for her, that's literally half of her life. And, but when you think about that, and for the scale of how things, happen and feel to us, it's true. The more you zoom out and there's a relativity component to all this, the way time and space all appear, and it's just a wild concept. So I relate to what you're saying with all that, Justin. As you zoom out and kind of gain perspective of it, it's wild to see the interplay when you think about those things.
Yeah. And then kind of not connected to that, the unfolding,
that's all her drafts for the chalk.
That looks more like the skill chart for Valhalla, but different. The unfolding, the necessity of I forget exactly what she says, but like
the constant and something, the inevitability of presence born from absence.
Yeah. So, and that's just an interesting idea to me, because to think about a space where there's nothing, to think about deep, dark space, there's nothing there. To have a definition of nothingness, we have to know what somethingness is, and vice versa. We have to know what somethingness is to know there isn't it here. And so I think that's a really interesting idea, that somethingness and nothingness go hand in hand, because one can't truly exist without the other. If there was only one state, then it wouldn't be worth defining, because you wouldn't have to say this is separate from nothing or this is separate from something. So again, it just keeps getting at these really odd ideas of just like, oh man, everything, bro,
Right. Yeah. It's like we're on a trip here. Well, the idea of the butterfly comes up a lot, and it's coming up in the images. It too seems to represent to Kate the same thing she's talking about with the farmlands and home. The butterfly is so familiar, it's so affecting, it's emotional, it's beautiful. But then also it's like a geometric shape, and its movements are very mathematical, and its populations can be graphed, and its genetics can be, modeled. And all of these things, represent like the mathematical realities that go with the personal realities. And here, I think, is a bit of that same image of the presence and the absence, right? The one is just a material, iterative, deterministic, graphable world, and the other is the observed and the felt and the familiar, the important, the kinds of things that a presence imbues upon these motions. She calls it an inevitability, and I don't know what to make of some of this. It's so very brief and almost poetic. I'm having trouble like parsing how she gets to that conclusion.
Well, if you go back to the thought of, like chaos theory, or maybe it's not chaos theory. I'm not good with theory, so I might be mixing all kinds of theories. There's like there's the Murphy's Law thought, which is whatever, can happen at some point will happen. I could totally be butchering that, but when you have all these, elements or components of just chaos and stuff out there, at some point there's a chance that anything can happen, even if it's billions of years until that moment reaches, or 5 seconds until a specific situation or moment plays out. I guess it could just be the infinite possibilities or sequences in which they play out, but at some point they will play out. Maybe that's,
like given enough time, we'll eventually get presence from absence. I mean,
who knows?
The problem with it is that there's no limit to to that way of thinking, right? Like, well, then everything will be happening.
Well, exactly. There's no constraint on it, so you can really run with it endlessly in any direction. That's really stretching the rubber band.
Yeah. Well, here we are at Tower 3, and we saw that on the chalkboard at Tower 2. We saw what looked like a bit of that Outer Wilds, like wormhole thing. We got two black holes, and then there's lines interconnecting as if there's things passing through. We're clearly talking about some kind of extra dimensionality here. The light seems to be extra dimensional. It can move faster than light. It can, like it passed through space and time in the blink of an eye. That's too fast for our laws. So something must be teleporting. And if light can teleport here, the pattern can teleport here, then maybe we can teleport to where it came from. Mm-hmm. And so she's probably playing around with some of those themes, as now she continues to kind of develop her thought here in the third station. And here we see pictures of the little balls of light, right?
Yeah.
She's actually able to capture them, which is...
Yeah. And then there are telescopes. And so it's fascinating that outside of theory, this is observable through our senses, because I didn't have a good grasp on, is this happening inside her mind? Is this actually happening in time and space? And so at the very least, this is saying that some of it is happening in time and space, at least enough for her to photograph it and, render the images. Or, what was it when it was analog, when you don't render images?
Develop
images.
I was gonna say make them.
Print
remember them. They're in the dark room where the water table.
Right. No, but you're right that here we're presented with the experiences through time of these things moving. We're reminded of our experience with them at least. And we experienced them through time in the 4 or 5 hours it took us to play through the game. And that that's all background for this moment as we are now being shown all of the people we met, or the, what do you call them, raptured people? They're encoded in light forms.
Yeah. And so I wonder if those have multiple pictures of the same people we met, or if those are depicting other stories that we didn't get to walk through.
I was wondering
because there's more pictures than the 5 stories we went through.
This is the interior of the chapel.
Here we go with Jeremy.
Yep. And I was trying to see if we could see a little ball of light with Lizzie, but a lot of these look like Wendy or from
Jeremy.
town.
Yeah,
Jeremy. Wendy and Jeremy here. Oh, but that one there is the farmhouse, so that's probably Frank.
Frank? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and it could be a mix. Who's to say it's, it could be absolutely characters that we've seen and then some.
Yeah. All right. Let's see what she has to say.
All right.
I know it didn't mean to hurt any of them. I try and explain why Lizzie tried to leave with her child and why it was wrong to stop her. I try and explain that much of what it did was wrong. It shows me Stephen and Lizzie together. And I'm happy for them. Frank walks his fields with Mary. Wendy and Edward nest together in the orchards of their love. Jeremy lies at peace with his God at last. All of them are happy because they are together. I understand it better now. It is a collector of time. No butterflies.
And then can you pan up? Yeah. Oh, it was doing a little like electrical connecting between the cones.
I did see that briefly, and we're getting a lot of aurora here.
Yeah.
Which we saw right before the bunker, and I think it's a sign of the light moving through the sky.
So
Enveloping
would,
the world.
yes, exactly. I would take that to mean that it's affecting more than
Right.
just this small hamlet now.
Now we're at the point where it's a global event.
And I mean, that's a lot of stars, folks. You know, that's a whole lot of stars.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I feel like some of that recording we addressed in some of our previous conversations.
Yeah.
Connection, is that valid? But it's interesting that the idea of morality is brought up in this. You know, why it's wrong for this to have happened. And then it's saying a collector of moments and a collector of butterflies.
A collector of time.
Yeah, so this we are seeing the only way that we can really collect moments. So it's not collecting time, but photographs are one of the only ways that we can collect them. But if someone is studying, you know, insects or biology or whatever, and they have a collection of butterflies, we don't really pass judgment on that. There's not really a morality issue. You'd assume if it's you know, being done humanely, but they're insects. You know, you're not really worried about it. And so it was another one of those scaling things to me, where if this being is a cosmic level entity,
collecting,
would we not look like insects to them? Like, is there any morality from that view? You know, and so we come from a point of view where we're made in the image of God, and so there's an intrinsic value for humans. But kind of taking it a step back and like, what if there was something so removed from that? Would there be truly any morality that we could put on that thing that just wants to collect us?
We're being shown these cones which have pictures on them being attached to other cones, right? That moment and that moment become connected. That moment and that moment become connected, and so forth, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So I think what's being shown visually is that the light is somehow folding in all of the moments of time upon each other, such that, you know, Frank's revelation at the end of his life after Mary's passed is, you know, I should have been with her. I'm with her now. But Mary's dead and has been for, 9 months or something. And what she seems to be saying here is that Frank and Mary are now connected because time is no longer linear. It's like all exists within the collection. And this is what the light has accomplished. It's collected not just Frank or Frank's memories or Frank's what, right? But it's also collected Mary. Now that preceded the light entirely. So I have a lot of questions. I'm like, how did the light get people who were already dead?
So
yeah.
I have another question, and maybe you guys paid attention to it during the tape. Did the light respond to her question or to her comment on the morality of the light's decision? In other words, she says, I tried to explain to it what it was doing was wrong. And then I can't remember if it said the light then showed me, or if like it just clicked in her mind. It was her own self, thought out solution on what was going on. And I guess what I'm getting at is I find it interesting at the thought of the light kind of playing the back and forth, like, yeah, I hear what you're saying, but let me show you what I was doing. And in that kind of goes back to our conversation of, I don't think the light is God. I think that's very evident in this. But once more, now you have kind of like a being of sorts with a motive. And so there is very much a morality at play in that it's her explaining why, no, this is wrong. And the light coming back to her and saying, no, check it out. Look at what I'm doing. and very much part of that scaling thing, like you said, Justin. If you scale out and it were a collector of butterflies or of us, so to speak, is that any less moral? It's just an interesting thought in all of this that there is somewhat of an exchange and communication over motives in this.
Yeah.
She did say, that she saw in the light, or she said it showed me, or, she was witnessing the coupling, as like a response to her, no, you can't kill these people. You can't take away their lives from them. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think there's the very first line is like, I didn't mean to hurt them, or something like that. And so I think you're right, Jimmy. There is a little bit of a back and forth. It almost feels like the light is, much bigger than anything that we have going on here, but then it's still trying to justify itself a little bit.
Yes.
Instead of just saying, hey,
almost
I know
like
more than you.
Yeah, it's almost like a kid, like, oh, I didn't mean to hurt him. I was trying to do this.
Yeah.
There's a immature almost aspect with that. I forgot that line was said. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I started to interpret the light as something close to when people describe like the universe as a sentient thing. Like, I'm just going to put that out in the universe. Or apparently the universe wanted me to X, Y, or Z.
Sure.
So, it's something other. It's something big, but it doesn't feel like God. And when you get to that size and when you get to that weird perspective, there's a passage in the Bible that talks about like, hey, a sculptor can use a piece of clay to make a trash can, and they're justified in that, or they can make a work of art, and neither is right or wrong. It's just the decision of the master, the decision of the larger being. And so it is weird when there's something so much larger trying to pass any judgment on it. It starts to be a really weird question.
Yeah.
Oh, we're actually hearing some weird radio static around here.
And there's a number of satellites and antenna at this location.
Yeah, that's true. All right, so number 4. Is this 4 or 5? No, 4. Okay, here we go.
I watched the pattern lean in and time slow to almost nothing. I saw
Then
the
pan up a
flame
little bit.
in Stephen's hand and the moment hang in the air forever. I watched his face. And in the last second, I almost believe he saw me. He wasn't frightened or angry. I remember his expression, just like I remember it from the first time, early that morning when he woke and, still half sleeping, said, God, I love you. And I loved him as he entered the fire. And I let him go, knowing I wasn't ready to join him. We have held time to ourselves here in this place. Held the light to the ground because we were afraid of the coming dark. But now we understand that to cling to the light is not living. I've spent my life watching the illumination from a million dead stars reaching for me without grasping this meaning. The light we cast transcends our death. The pattern made by our living creates a bridge across the dark.
So we're getting a little pickup in speed here because now the vocalist begins chanting these lines, which is awesome.
Give me goosebumps.
It's also that there was so much in what she just said. This is the counter moment to the bunker scene where Stephen thinks he sees Kate. And I think we're meant to conclude that even though they seem to have been reduced to only the patterns of light that, you know, the entity here has, you know, saved of them, yet they maintain some kind of consciousness such that they can see each other.
Well, and it would make sense if, as she's describing what she sees. I mean, it would be congruent with that. You've got all of these characters, Jeremy, and has got Lizzie, and I mean, I'm forgetting all their names. But the fact that she is seeing them together, I would assume would be of somewhat of a similar state. It's also really interesting to stop and think about the concept of how time is slowing in this moment. And so I interpret that to kind of think like she's leaning in closer towards like being enveloped by the light, like almost like peering up to the glass of here is the state in which these people will be in. Like you were saying, Ryan, all of time is just this like centralized place. Time seems to have slowed down in that moment. It's just a fascinating thought in my mind. It feels like she comes very close, but then backs away almost, if that makes sense. And emotionally gets to that point where she can let him go. It's just that's an emotional tape to go through.
We're given that frankly that like sexual image of her and Steven in the morning. And she sees Steven and is reminded of that moment, but then she pulls back. And it's this testimony that she's not ready to couple, right? She is not interested in the connectedness that comes by connecting through Steven. And at least that's what I take from that moment in the story. She's happy for all the other couples, but there's still this reticence, this like, no, that's not what I'm after.
Right. And that's paid off in the rest of this finale.
Right.
But to both your points, those moments when you're, witnessing someone's death, and the moments of infatuation and early love, those are moments that kind of slow and stick with you, for totally different reasons. So it's interesting that those two are compared. And then I am fascinated where she's talking about like we're holding the light down in fear of the coming darkness. I feel like if you're, that analogy is fascinating because if you're holding light down, you'd feel like that's illuminating, but because it sounds like she's capturing it instead of letting it free. Because like letting it free would mean darkness and that it's going away, but it doesn't, create darkness. It what we're seeing on the screen, everything's being lit, everything's being affected by it. So it's a darkness that I think is more in line with the first tower, where it's talking about the absence and the presence, the people, and then they're not here anymore. They've been raptured, whatever that means. So the coming darkness, I feel like, is the aloneness and the void of no people.
She collapses this metaphor of the pattern, interestingly, in that last dialogue. The pattern has only ever been used of the entity, and here she says our pattern. She talks about the pattern of light we cast, and that's interesting because it seems like the light has been kind of making a pattern of people, but she seems to think that we already were a pattern, and all the light is doing is incarnating it, embodying it. And that's a very interesting supposition, I think, because I'm reminded of free will and determinism. Are we are we the product of our environments where every action we take, everything we say or think is all kind of determined by the development of the cells in our bodies and the environment we're birthed into? Or do we have some agency and control over that? We certainly feel like we do, which it seems like Kate would say, well, that feeling is an illusion, that you really are a pattern, but you're both, right? You are presence in the midst of some kind of mathematical construct. And neither is less so.
And it's interesting when the theme of a butterfly is being used throughout this, because when you think of a butterfly, two things come to my mind. There's a lot of freedom and beauty, in the way it's fluttering by and all of that, but it is the second iteration of this thing's life, right? It was a caterpillar and it became
right.
something else. And I think that there's a lot of becoming something else in this game. But then that caterpillar was destined to become a butterfly. So how much of that is, kind of a choice because, it goes and makes a cocoon and all of that. But how much of it is like the caterpillar really had no choice in this at all? It was going to happen one way or the other. So
man, that's an interesting thought.
While there's like so much freedom, butterfly dancing in a ray of sunshine and stuff, it started as a caterpillar, and did it have any say in that at all?
Right.
So I'll just mention this because it's such a significant moment when she talks about understanding the secret of the stars and why, we look up in the night sky, we think it is full of, star entities, but in fact, we're likely looking at a much darker space in reality because some of those lights have winked out
not there, right,
in the midst of their travel, through space and time. And so the question is this some kind of cosmic cheat, right? Is our sense of the presence in the sky wrong? Or is it in fact a tell of like the way things actually are, that we ought not to lose heart when we discover that they're dead, because the light they cast, as she puts, created a bridge that creates now a togetherness that we share with that star that we otherwise wouldn't have had.
Yeah, you wouldn't have that without it.
Something like that, and in virtue of us being physical beings with heat, we're casting off electromagnetic radiation, in which we can see in infrared. And you might think of our light as casting out of our bodies in that very physical sense. And I think she's also referring to it metaphorically in terms of our mind. Our memories, our behaviors are making a difference on the people around us and in our world. And there is a legacy to that is not lost even in our death, merely because the physicality of the changes we've made endures.
Legacy was the word I had written down in my notes, not only because I'm obsessed with Hamilton, but because it is the way that we live on past our death. Light as an idea is just so fascinating to me because it's like a ray and also a particle, and like, it's just, it's just strange. And so from the get-go, when you start talking about light to any extent, I'm like, all right, I'm listening and I don't understand, and it's so cool. But I love the idea that we go on after our death, using the analogy of the star, that the light that it casts off is going to keep going. We're all dads. The impact we have on our kids and our friends and our family will go on past us. Rye, you're working to publish a book. That's going to be a physical thing that goes on past you. So yeah, it's interesting to try to think about, again, zooming out, not just what am I doing in this moment? What am I doing even in my lifetime, but what am I doing that will have an impact past all this?
Yep. Oh, and that was Jimmy's favorite moment here. All the chalk she spent drawing that on the ground.
Who has the like? I mean, I watched my kid, and then I watched the other kids on my street play with chalk. And while impressive, it takes time to cover that driveway. Who has the time to do what she's done?
And,
Oh god!
And there's no mess ups. Like
I love, and I love thinking about the fact that they would have had to purchase all of that at some point. So, you know, I imagine like the office manager being like, "We have enough chalk. Why are you asking me to?"
No. We need a lot more.
In case of an apocalypse, this place is gonna be my entire whiteboard.
And on top of that, I'm going to need some really strong power cables to dangle these TVs. And if you have a good ladder.
Who hired this American lady? We need to get someone new.
I think, okay, it's like each one of these moments escalates a little more. Like, I don't know why you're drawing circles around dead birds versus just like moving them, but okay, fine. Like, I don't know why you had to use a traffic cone to tape your photos up, but fine. Maybe that's all you could find. Now we're hanging TVs as ornaments.
Yeah.
Like, this lady loves Christmas, I guess.
We assume all of this happened after the pattern arrived.
Yeah.
Maybe Kate's just been insane this whole time. And this is the status of Valis.
Like, the nerve gas is like, you know, attacking the town. She's like, I'm up here hanging TVs. Just
so we if you watch the Dear Esther walkthrough, right? Like, this is par for the course with the developers. They love this almost installation art style, you know, let's hang some images in some trees, you know, kind of idea. And it's the off-putting nature of it that gets us to attend to it. Now, I don't know if it means a whole lot. I mean, we're surrounding a person with TVs here, and maybe that's kind of the idea.
You know, if it's the Super Bowl, you're never going to miss a play. So, you know, maybe she just really wanted to watch something.
If she's in the middle, or if we're like, take this in as a metaphor for life, right? You know, here we are in the center of all of these signals that are passing through the sky. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, I like wondered about that once. I was like, you mean all of radio, music is constantly passing through our ears. We just can't hear it.
Right.
Yeah.
It exists in the air.
Well,
I think it was one of the later seasons of the show Heroes that one of the superpowers someone had was they were able to see radio waves and television waves. And so that was just super fascinating to try to think about what would it look like to be able to see all these realities that are around us all the time that we don't have the capacity for. And so, I mean, that brings up some great questions, not only about electricity and light and radio waves, but then like spiritual realities. So if these other realities exist and are constantly around us and we just don't have the mechanism to recognize it, what else might be around us? You know, whether it's this pattern or spiritual realities. And then, Rai, you did something that it struck me. You panned from the left down on the ground where there's kind of like a single television, to the right where there's a stack of televisions, then further to the right where they're up in the trees. And that just felt like a progression that I hadn't seen just because I hadn't watched that movement. I was just kind of taking it as a circle, but it really does feel like it's like the ordinary and familiar to like, that's weird that there's a bunch stacked together, to up in the tree.
She used it like a ladder to climb up on the TVs to hang more TVs. No,
But
okay.
the trees themselves are like signals. I mean, trees are very fractal-like. You know, they follow mathematical branches, and so trees are like radio waves given a kind of form. You know,
Huh.
I just see a whole lot of this attempt to like take the minutia of biology that we kind of don't know what to do with, right? Because we don't say we're reduced to our mere cells. We believe we're more than the sum of our parts. But she seems very intent to remind us that no, we are our parts. Like our parts are us. And so, but maybe we can go from the parts into kind of a bigger reality here. And Justin, I think you're kind of onto it, like with these spiritual waves, if you will. She's not going to use that kind of language, but it would the way she's talking about it would feel right at home with that kind of interpretation. And in fact, it's one of the things that I have trouble not faulting her for, because she seems to be a scientist who's interested in sticking close to the facts and the math of existence, but then she moves almost too quickly to postulate exterior realities that I guess the only scientific basis she'd have is in this entirely fictional universe, you know. But maybe that's the point, you know. The only way we could ever conclude with her is if we encounter something so mystical as the pattern.
You know, it's really funny, Justin. You said something that it really struck me. When we stop and think about other realities that we can't see, we don't know they're around us, and how often, you know, we tend to think of that as probably in the same manner she is. It's almost like you're doing everything you can to try and understand it and see it when it could very well be right before your eyes, and we just have the inability to comprehend or see or do it. Or how often something like maybe a different reality or something is right beneath our nose and within our grasp to see it, we just may not understand that. And so, for example, one of the things I was thinking about is I tend to listen to like a podcast or music when I'm falling asleep if I'm having a hard time sleeping. And it always amazes me that I have moments where I doze off and I pass out. And then 5 or 10 minutes later, I'll wake up and I will hear the music and I go, oh, that's still on. But in that time period where I was asleep, I had no concept that it was making music into my ear. It's right there blaring into my head, and I'm completely unaware that it's going there. And so I think about this game in a similar extent. You know, how often is there something happening right below us or right near us, right in front of our eyes, and we're just missing it? It's blaring into our ears or into our senses, and we're just too dull, or maybe it's by choice or whatever the reason is, unable to see it. It's really fascinating to think about that. You know, what else is going on around us that we just have no idea.
Yeah, the central metaphor for seeing the light memories is that tuning, right? You have to tune the light to the exact right position, and then the frequencies begin to make that ringing sound. And then all of a sudden the flashing begins and you see the memory. And that seems very intentional. You know, radios are all throughout this game. They're in the menus at the beginning. And the idea of tuning in to our own memories and our own lives, and that being something that largely passes without our awareness, except for those few moments when we feel like we have made a connection. This, just as you were saying, Jimmy, I think this game is trying to evoke that very feeling of being mostly out of touch, and then at a few moments, that epiphany, that moment when you connect. And not all memories make the cut, but a few do, and those are the ones perhaps that we witness throughout this game.
Yeah.
All right, let me play number 5 here.
And then can you pan up so we can see the TVs?
Oh, yeah.
It reaches out from the shadow of the tower, across the observatory, over the valley, and consumes the world. Everything is light now. Everything has come to rest. The world is scored by the traces we carved into it. Our presence is everywhere, the bridge joining our stories. This world existed before we came to it, and it will continue without us. In the empty fields and houses, our traces radiate, and others will come to dance in the light we cast. We can slip away gently, unafraid, knowing that everything will continue.
Except us?
Except us.
Or you will continue, just not in the way you want to.
I don't know, right?
That's the question.
So this feels very Eastern, right? I have trouble parsing it, though.
It seems to have a before, during, and after.
Right.
So I think there is something about, becoming one with the pattern in some way, but it does seem that we lose a part of ourselves in that. I think it's interesting just using the Earth, and so you'll zoom in and use this town as the example, that all the empty houses, there's no question that there were people here. Just that's part of the physical legacy, is that there are paved roads, there are houses, right, there are structures and all of that. So there's no question that there were people here before, and there's also no question that there's not people here now. And so it's interesting that part of our legacy is simply the effect we have on our planet. And I don't really feel like this goes into a conservationist argument immediately, but that strikes me that part of our legacy, part of the bridge we leave, is how we're leaving our home, how we're leaving the Earth. So, yeah.
Yeah, we also saw just now the creation of one of those light balls.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The light is radiating out from all those televisions, and it's creating one of those entities that we followed. And it very much is a product of its environment. It's a fusion of all the signals that somehow are related, and then it coalesces into an entity thing that then moves through the game. We've been following these entities that represented Jeremy and Lizzie and Frank and so forth. Are they those people? It does. I mean, Kate would probably say, "Does it matter?" Or maybe she would say, "Yes."
Yeah. And then I feel like there are a couple different types of. I feel like there are a couple different types of those energies, because there is the ones that seem at least somewhat sentient and have a will and want us to follow, but then there are those memory ones that seem to be more of that, collection of time, collection of butterflies.
Sure. Yeah.
That doesn't seem to be sentient. It just seems to be a snapshot.
Those are the new guys. They have to pay their dues before they can move around. They just sit there and.
Jimmy, she made mistakes. Look at this.
Okay, fair enough. Fair
enough.
enough.
Use more chalk.
See, this is on the alleyway. Yeah, there was her draft. Okay, see, that line's curved a little. That's
R is greater than 2M. Of course.
And she believed in that. She didn't cross that out. So
I would love for an actual mathematician to look at this and see if there's anything in here that is remotely true or spot on, or if it's just something like any of us would be like, well, this looks scientific.
That's true.
That looks fancy.
Yeah. Maybe that's all she was doing. Maybe she was a horrible scientist. Had no idea. That's why she's hanging TVs and using traffic cones. Maybe there's a reason she was an outcast. She was a bad scientist.
So this is
a modern art installation.
Yes.
This is Tower 6. This is definitely the last tower.
Yep.
And yeah, we're following the light into the very end. And there's that line that began the game. The line has gone out through all the earth. And it's a quotation of the Psalms.
And the lights coming up from the ground.
Yeah, very distinctively. All right, I'm gonna play the final cutscene, and then we'll talk in the credits.
Yeah. Walking through that door weirded me out because you like turn around. It's like, oh, there's no door there.
So yeah, here's another of those memories. I'm trying to remember how I grab it. There it is. Not that way. Got to get it exactly right.
The end is coming now. I'm not afraid. We have each other. We lived apart from them. We understand now our failure to touch, to belong. But it doesn't matter anymore. Everybody is gone, and we will join them. We are born apart, driftwood on the banks of an endless dark ocean, and we will be carried away by the swell soon enough. But in between, in the single day of living, that dancing in a strip of sunlight, we can find what we miss. The love that makes us whole. The imminence. Everybody found their other. This pattern is mine.
This is where we learn Kate had an obscene obsession with flashlights growing up. She always loved anything that was light. You just never knew.
So I think we mentioned, but it's nice when we have the visual, that it looks very reminiscent of the creation of Adam, with kind of the deity reaching down and touching. But where the creation of Adam is giving life, this seems to be sucking it into itself. And that's just interesting to me.
The creation of Adam is also like the impotence of man to stretch a tiny finger to touch God, right? And here we see the opposite, the like obsessive nature of man to reach out and grasp. And in fact, it's a woman in this image. So, you know, I don't know if that is any significance, but yeah.
Some of that last monologue reminded me of Thornton Wilder's Our Town, where it was kind of reminiscing on how the simple things in life are life. You know, a single day, being in a ray of sunshine. In Thornton Wilder's Our Town, for someone that's not familiar with it, there's a monologue near the end that is given by someone who has died and has greater perspective now on how valuable life is, goes back into an ordinary day, but the kind of curse is that everyone else is just going through the day as it happened, and she's unable to change any of it. So she's unable to in this moment where her whole family's together getting breakfast, hug everyone and have a very, very significant conversation. They're just going about their day as they did in that day. So this just kind of reminded me of that sentiment of how valuable our fleeting moments are, and how someone said when my son was born that the days are long but the years are fast. And so when I'm exhausted from him waking us up every 2 or 3 hours for food, just to try to be present and appreciate it, and not just be annoyed by it, because this time will pass, in the immediate sense, but then also in the greater sense of we'll all pass away at some point.
Mm. Mm.
Well said, man.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just so weird when she's saying at one kind of in one line that the end is here. Like she expects the end of her existence. The caterpillar that she has been is going to disappear. And there's an uncertainty in that like, will she even be her on the other side? I'm guessing that's kind of baked into the image a little bit. But there's this surety that she has that she will move on now as this transcended thing, and that is a good transition, and she has nothing to fear in that, and that she's whole in that. She's actually more whole in that than she was ever in life, which is a huge thing to say, right?
Oh, of course. If you can reach that point of being, at peace with your existence and, what's comes next as you, cross through death. Yeah. What more is there left to conquer in life as far as, challenging your fears go? So you do kind of reach that place of peace. I still struggle with, we talked a lot about this last time. I still struggle with her connection with the light and the pairings and sort of the meaning as they go forward. But it is really good to rewatch that and really instead of focusing on the mechanics of like, oh, the light was my other half, just watching the progression of like her growth and acceptance of reaching that point. And that's also symbolic, obviously, of the caterpillar to a butterfly point.
Yeah.
Go through those patterns.
She seems to think of the coupling almost like a harmony. You have one signal at one frequency and another at another, and these are related and complementary to each other. They don't have dissonance. And so she's been looking for her harmony, this whole thing. And so, it's just so abstract, and I get the poetic feeling of it. But the scientific mind, the problem that the scientific
boggles
question of this whole thing, I don't think was really addressed or answered.
No, it does not feel like it was.
Yeah.
I am blanking on this, and it's bothering me. What was Christopher Nolan's space movie that came out? Like
Interstellar.
Mm-hmm. This feels like it's reaching some of the similar conclusions that Interstellar made, where it's like, okay, so there's space and time, but then there are other things. And so while we're walking through the first 5 towers, we're kind of grasping at things that can be measured in one way or another. Even if it's somewhat theoretical, it's something that
there's
is
some level of
pretty based in science in some way. And then we get to Tower 6, and she starts going into, and I mean has been the whole time, but she dives hard into some things that we don't know how to quantify. And so she's starting to talk about relationships and love. And I was thankful that I thought of Interstellar, because it's at least another example of something that says, hey, love is a thing. What if it had a scientific impact that we just don't understand right now?
Sure.
And so, yeah, it's fascinating to think about. What are things that we don't know how to scientifically measure right now? Because we can, figure out when endorphins and dopamine is pumped into our system because of love, because of relationships and good feelings and things like that. But we don't really have a metric for love and for relationships. Yeah, and so I feel like that's the question that is not answered by this game, but it's like asked. Like, what if a scientist decides love and connection is the answer? But how do you show your work on that, other than the pattern has been showing its work?
Yeah, it's a kind of interesting thought that this game, it's certainly not arguing for the existence of aliens, right? But it may be arguing for the possibility of rapture, that human beings are compatible with rapture. It's kind of a softer argument to make, but one that says, well, this is a plausible end because, this is kind of how our lives work. And we kind of have a hope for this. And so while there certainly hasn't been a pattern that's invaded the world, like in some ways we better watch out because it could come for us, we won't have a defense when it does, but we wouldn't want one either, because this is exactly what the collective cry of the human spirit has been longing for, this kind of idea. Oh, and there's our final quote.
Yeah. I wrote that down somewhere. It may have been a picture that I took. I will read that for you guys. Did you look that one up?
Yeah, I did. It's good. It's good. It kind of underscores everything we've been talking about too.
Okay, here we go. In the wake of a human being's death, what survives is a set of afterglows, some brighter and some dimmer, in the collective brains of those dearest to them. There is, in those who remain, a collective corona that still glows. And so, I mean, that pulls into sharp focus some of the point of this game.
Totally does.
Yeah.
But it's so strange that aside from the player, who might be Kate, who might be a random observer, there's no one else to appreciate that afterglow. And so parts of that resonate with me, but then parts of that are so different from how the game played out.
Well, arguably, Kate is the player, right? Like when we walked into the tower at the end and we were presented a cutscene that maybe is us, and everything we witnessed in the game was just the kinds of things that she was mentally walking back through in those, 6 cutscenes. That would come to say that instead of this being a kind of lonely end of the world story as we, the lone observer, kind of witness the end and then are left to nothing, rather we're just collecting everything that Kate has learned and then departing in the joy of participation in all of it as the last to go.
Yeah. And thinking of ourselves as an observer of this game, and this game as part of the legacy of its creators. It has affected me. It's affected us. It has helped us to ask some good questions and think about things from different angles. And, we're just a small sample of the thousands or millions of people that have played this game. And so it's interesting just to see this as one of those, maybe brighter afterglows of some of the people that created this and handed it off to us as part of their legacy, as part of their bridge.
And I'll say too that this idea of rapture has a very biblical and Christian origin here. And even the idea of light being the vehicle for love and connection is very strongly connected. I mean, the whole thing's based on a psalm, the notion that maybe it was the pattern is not so much, light moving along radio waves, but rather love itself coming to reclaim us, coming to draw us into itself. Couldn't be any more of a Christian image. So this game is, I think, borrowing heavily from the religious history of, Britain, the land where it is, Anglicans and, priestly community and connection and the participation that all people have in that and the hope for an afterlife. I mean, this is very, this is a very Christian game. And I don't think you can escape it. In fact, I think the more you kind of try to cut off that dimension of it, the religious dimension of it, the more the game makes less sense.
Well, and it's funny because it felt like, Justin, you were saying the first 5 towers, it felt very scientific in one sense. She's quantifying all these different pieces and kind of formulating it. And then you get to Tower 7 and that to me felt like the most spiritual experience, which is something you can't quantify. And yet it felt like that was the crux piece of it. And so you're right, Ryan. If you remove that, it's very hard to even try and reconcile what the game's, experience is. And so it's very much intertwined and obviously the themes are heavily present throughout the whole game. But that final moment is one that for me felt like a very spiritual experience for her. And now we're kind of transcending past just the scientific elements of the hows and whys and the mechanics of the nuts and bolts of what's going on to, things that are relationships and love and meaning and legacy and memories and, what comes next and what does that mean and stuff like that. It's
Yeah.
And I think I really took in that this was a scientific event that was happening more than a spiritual event, probably mostly because we're having this entire story told to us by a scientist, right?
Yeah.
But that feels like a really straightforward resolution, right? That it's like, okay, so this is a spiritual event that's happening, that's being interpreted by a scientist, and it feels kind of like trying to shove a square peg into a round hole. It's like a lot of what she's getting at. I think I used the analogy earlier where it's like these are leaky bucket theories. It's like it holds some water but it's leaking, so you put another bucket under it to catch that water, but that one's leaking, so you put another one. And so all of the images that she's painting, you're like, okay, but if she were just to say like, oh, something transcendent is happening, like love personified is here, connecting us, or something like that, that doesn't feel scientific at all, but maybe that's the truth of what's happening.
Right.
It's very incarnational too, because she imputes on the light a lot of things that's really her problems. She believes the light is lonely and is disconnected and is seeking a way to connect. And I mean, honestly, that's her journey. And I kind of don't believe that the lights has those kind of insecurities. It seems to know what it's doing.
Right. It doesn't seem to apologize. It does, it seems to condescend to her and try to
Leave me alone.
explain, but it does feel like it's coming from a secure place.
And it's the kind of security that can then take that, projection that she's giving to it, but not be offended by it or driven away by it. Like the light can take it into itself and meet her where she's at. That is very reminiscent of the incarnation. And that seems a big part of this story, that the light meets you where you're at and draws you into itself. So yeah, again, I see so many metaphors here kind of drawn from, the religious nature of its title, which is cool, because I used to think that the Rapture was kind of the lamest thing about, the beliefs I grew up with, probably one of the least supported and kind of most ridiculous and most off-putting, belief that I may have believed as a kid. But here, this has been raised to a beautiful poetic image. That's so cool.
Yeah.
I was really happy to have played it, if only for that. It raptured the idea of rapture.
Yeah, it really did. It changed it, because you get this. Yeah, there's so many different ways that you could show it, and most of them would be, how we're used to reading about them or seeing them as, kids. What does a rapture seem like? And this was so different than anything I would have ever, conceived on, and it was really cool.
Yeah. So this game, I'm so happy to have shared it with you guys, and our viewers. It's a dear game to me, and in kind of my top 5 games I've ever played.
Wow.
It was one of those games that kind of exactly fit me and my temperament. So it's really fun to have shared it with you, knowing that I share a little piece of myself when I share this game. It also got me hungering for this question of how we metaphorically understand science and physical realities and astronomy, because she begins to speculate on what we can draw from the nature of the stars and the nature of light being birthed, and then continuing throughout all of space and time, even though its entity star passes away. Is this a lonely universe, a dark romantic sea, or is this something that represents the nature of God somehow? So I became very interested in natural theology when I played this game, and wondering, if I could take some of these ideas even further than this game went. So that inspired me to become a writer and start doing stuff. I mean, this game, was really, really influential for me.
Huh.
That's awesome.
But we must move on, gents.
No.
More great games await.
And it's fun that this will become part of our shorthand. I anticipate we'll reference some of these ideas, experiences, gameplay, whatever, in some of our future conversations.
Yeah. This, Outer Wilds, and Face Off.
You know it, dude. That's why we're here. It's Face Off. Ultimately, we are going to get an episode that is just nothing but Face Off. Be like episode 274, but we'll get there.
You go. Well, now it's practically faded.
Yeah.
Now I'm gonna have to count out to that, Jimmy, and find a way to make that work. And I mean, would we start with the Story Geeks, or do we start with our channel? We'll have to figure out which of these episodes is canon.
All right. Well, I'll sign us off here.
Rock and roll.
Rock and roll. Woo! So good. All right. Now, the the upshot is I can't even find my mouse because I had to get rid of it for the stream.
Just pull the power cord.
I'll sign us out for this one.
Oh, wait, I got it.
Okay.
See you at Transistor.
Transistor.